Hello there, welcome to World Panorama, your favorite weekly show on biggest international news stories that made headlines this week. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor and here is a look at this week's top stories. U.S.-IRAN war of words at the United Nations. Trump urges international community to isolate Tehran from global trade. Trade tariff dispute splits wide open cracks among U.S. and European allies that are looking for ways to bypass Iran sanctions. U.S. says UN sanctions on North Korea must remain in place, runs into opposition from Russia, China at the UNSC meet. Pompeo to travel to North Korea to arrange second Trump-Kim summit. Maldives turns over a new leaf, set to swear in Ibrahim Mohammed Soli as new president. Massive voter turnout sweeps Abdullah Yameen out of power amid charges of graft, rights abuses and jailing of dissidents. And pressure building on Venezuela. Washington imposes sanctions on the country's first lady and 3 top officials, also hints at military action. Several Latin American countries urge investigation into Venezuelan government's crimes against humanity. Our top story this week: at the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly, U.S. and Iran clashed over Iran nuclear deal. President Donald Trump at the general debate urged the international community to isolate Tehran from global trade. Thereafter, at the UNSC meeting, Donald Trump repeated the plea to the other 14 UNSC members. But far from siding with the U.S.'s stand on Iran policy, heads of states and foreign ministers rejected it, delivering a diplomatic repudiation to the United States. However, Donald Trump insists that he's not backing out on plans to double down sanctions on Iran, saying that they will be in full force by November.
The week saw an escalation of U.S.-Iran conflict, with U.S. President Donald Trump and his Iranian counterpart Hassan Rouhani clashing sharply at the UN General Assembly. Trump first using the general debate at the UNGA to call out Iran and urging the international community to isolate Tehran from global trade. Thereafter, the next day, speaking at the United Nations Security Council, Trump doubled down on the plan to impose sanctions on Iran, saying they will be in full force by November.
Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction. They do not respect their neighbors or borders or the sovereign rights of nations. Instead, Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond.
However, Iran pushed back, accusing the Trump administration of a might-is-right authoritarian streak and of violating international law. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, in his speech to the United Nations General Assembly, criticized Washington for its hostile approach towards his country and called U.S. sanctions economic terrorism.
The United States policy vis-à-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran has been wronged from the beginning, and its approach of resisting the wishes of Iranian people, as manifested in numerous elections, is doomed to fail.
The US did not stop at this clash at the United Nations, ratcheting up the pressure on Iran, with US National Security Advisor John Bolton demanding changes in Tehran's behavior, threatening there will be hell to pay.
According to the mullahs in Tehran, we are the great Satan, lord of the underworld, master of the raging inferno. So I might imagine they would take me seriously that when I assure them today that if you cross us, our allies or our partners, if you harm our citizens, if you continue to lie, cheat, and deceive, yes, there will indeed be hell.
However, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani dismissed the threats, saying America is alone. Indeed, there is some truth to that. At the UNSC meeting, there was not a single member state that joined the president in condemning the nuclear deal with Iran. The remaining parties to the Iran nuclear deal, Britain, China, France, Germany, Russia, have agreed to keep working to maintain trade with Tehran. British Prime Minister Theresa May has used speeches at the UN summit in New York to contradict Trump's isolationist view of the world, arguing that the best way to resist extremist forces was through close cooperation between the countries. French President Emmanuel Macron said the United States' policy of sanctions and containment on Iran was not enough and that a long-term plan to manage the crisis should be put together. Russia warned that the US withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal creates a serious threat for the non-proliferation regime.
Ensuite, je souhaite qu'on puisse poursuivre la discussion sur l'Iran.
I hope that we can continue our discussions on Iran. There is a disagreement on the agreement itself, but I hope that we can, using different methodologies, construct a solution that will appease the region and find a solution to the Iranian problem. The unilateral withdrawal of the United States from Iran nuclear program creates a serious threat for the non-proliferation regime. Tehran is strictly abiding by its commitments within the JCPOA. Russia is convinced that we need to keep the JCPOA.
US message to Iran is clear. It must change or deal with the US, and the world should join Washington in this endeavor. Further, sanctions will be hit on those who buy Iranian energy supplies in November. However, several nations are looking at ways to circumvent US sanctions, like taking recourse to a barter system, similar to one used by the Soviet Union during the Cold War to facilitate oil transaction with Iran. If that happens, it would be interesting what action would the US take to prohibit such barter transactions. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
We have with us, joining us, Mr. D.P. Srivastava, former ambassador to Iran, joining us. Thank you so much, sir. At the United Nations, we saw this sharp war of words, really, between the US and Iran. So considering that the US sanctions are going to be implemented, how do you read US's stance against Iran?
President Trump's speech at the United Nations was partly driven by domestic agenda, partly by geopolitics. The domestic agenda relates to Republican position on nuclear deal. Even before Trump became president, when he was still candidate Trump, the a year before that also, the Republican position was that this deal is not sufficient, and that is one of the reasons why Obama administration never got or tried to obtain the congressional approval. So this is a domestic dimension. Then there's a geopolitics, which is that Israel and Gulf monarchies, who are US allies, did not like the nuclear deal from the beginning. But there is a third dimension, and that was also referred to by President Trump in his speech. He said OPEC countries are ripping us off. And some of these countries are protected by the US. Now, the reference here was to Gulf monarchies. And this points to a contradiction within the US policy. That is, on one hand, they have withdrawn from the Iran deal, which basically takes out 2.2 million barrels of crude oil from the international trade, international market. On the other hand, they want to keep the prices stable, especially in an election year. So, and this also reflects the, and on the other hand, amongst the OPEC countries, they support the sanctions. That is a geopolitical consideration. And they also want higher prices. So there's and Russia, which has a bearing on, OPEC now accounts for only 1/3 of global oil production. So OPEC is no longer price setter. They require the support of other major producers led by Russia. And Russia certainly does not support the sanctions, but it does want higher prices anyway.
Yes.
So it's a complicated situation.
But, US is putting pressure on international community, saying that it should or everyone should actually isolate Tehran from global trade. And the allies of US are not agreeing to it. In fact, they're looking for ways to bypass US sanctions through various methodologies. Do you think US is actually isolated on this issue?
I'll put it differently. It's not a question of US being isolated. You can say the US has not been able to isolate Iran, which does have a lot of support, including amongst the other partners or signatories to this deal. Incidentally, and this the deal remains in force because it was not simply a multilateral deal amongst the P5+1. It was also approved by UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which remains in force, and United States is a permanent member. And the second aspect to remember is that IAEA has said that Iran is in compliance with its obligations under the deal. So whatever is now the debate is about issues which are not part of the original deal. Now, about isolating Iran, US sanctions are being resisted by its European partners, and of course Russia and China do not accept it. But it's not simply a question of governments, it's also a question of companies. And the companies may make an assessment of the relative advantage of Iranian market and US market, and frankly US market for all the companies is much larger than the Iranian market. And that is where the problem lies.
Absolutely. And sir, speaking about the implications, yesterday we saw the oil prices rose by 1%. Also, the Brent, climbing to a fresh 4-year high. And Saudi Arabia says it is, likely to add oil in the next couple of months. But do you think that be able to, really offset the damages really due to the US sanctions on Iran? What will be the possible implications as far as the oil prices are concerned?
That's a very important question because it affects all of us. And Iran was exporting 2.3 million barrel at a minimum. Its own claim is 2.8 million, but at a minimum 2.3. Currently, some of the production is already off the market. So you are talking of, replacing about 1.5 to 1.7 million barrel. There's no way that this can be replaced. The reason is not simply the question of spare capacity. It's very interesting that on 27th of September, that is just 3 days back, OPEC and non-OPEC producers led by Russia concluded a meeting where they reviewed the oil prices and they concluded that there was no need to increase production. Now this was just 2 days before the Security Council debate. So interestingly, Saudi Arabian oil minister said, we have the spare capacity, but the market is balanced. And he added further that there is no demand from the refiners. Now this is, so now, even if what he is saying is that even if I have the capacity to supply more, I will not do it. Because, the market is balanced. Now, the interesting aspect is that the market is balanced at a lower level because OPEC has, and Russian-led, oil exporting countries have decided to keep the production low. They are talking about keeping to a production level agreed in November 2016, which is 2 years ago, which misses out 2 years of growth in world economy and growth in oil demand. So this has created artificial scarcity and pushed up the prices. And this trend began even before the US withdrawal. So, there are two different factors, but they're pushing up the oil prices and they are reinforcing each other. Now, what will happen after 4th September? Even if the Saudi position or the OPEC position changes and they decide to bring more oil to the market, it is unlikely that they will be able to take care of the extent of loss.
So far, US is unwavering on Iran sanctions. It will be interesting to see how those really fall out of those sanctions really pan out in the days to come. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us and sharing your perspective on this entire story. Thank you so much for joining us. On to some other news. Well, the US has demanded a continuation of North Korea sanctions. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo insisted at the United Nations that the world stands at the dawn of a new day in relations with North Korea, but says that international sanctions must remain in place to get the country to denuclearize. However, US's stance faced resistance from China and Russia. This comes as Pompeo will travel again to North Korea to meet with the senior leaders there in preparation for a second summit between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
At the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly, the issue of denuclearization of North Korea invited fiery speeches and strong statements. South Korea President Moon Jae-in, while speaking in General Assembly, was all praises for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump for encouraging what he called was something miraculous on the Korean Peninsula. He urged the international community to support the process of denuclearization and end the Korean War. His statement coming a week after an inter-Korean summit at Pyongyang, where North Korea promised to dismantle a missile site and also a nuclear complex if the US took corresponding action.
Over the past year, something miraculous has taken place on the Korean Peninsula. Chairman Kim Jong-un and I removed the shadow of war and resolved to usher in a new era of peace and prosperity.
Mr. Secretary, do you have a message for North Korea today after your meeting with Mr. Ri yesterday?
Morning, everyone. How y'all doing?
However, the US, it seems, is not ready to buy that. At a meeting of United Nations Security Council, chaired by Secretary of the State Mike Pompeo, US insisted on continuing with UNSC sanctions on North Korea until there was a verified denuclearization.
We must not forget what's brought us this far, the historic international pressure campaign that this Council has made possible through the sanctions that it imposed. Until the final denuclearization of the DPRK is achieved and fully verified, it is our solemn collective responsibility to fully implement all UN Security Council resolutions pertaining to North Korea.
The US stand on North Korea was in complete contrast to that of China and Russia, both demanding at the meeting that Security Council must consider easing the tough measures based on positive developments. After US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met in Singapore in June this year. China said there are provisions in Security Council resolution for the body to modify sanctions if North Korea complies. It's noteworthy that Security Council has unanimously boosted sanctions on North Korea since 2006 in a bid to choke off the funding for Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic missile programs.
There is a provision in the Security Council resolutions to modify the sanctions measures in the light of DPRK's compliance. Security Council needs to consider invoking this provision to encourage the DPRK and other relevant parties to move denuclearization further ahead. It is unacceptable for sanctions against the DPRK to become an instrument of collective punishment. Steps by the DPRK towards gradual disarmament should be followed by easing of sanctions.
The developments come as momentum builds towards a second summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un. At the first meeting of the UN gathering this week, Trump said a second summit with Kim would take place soon. To prepare for that meeting, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will visit Pyongyang next month at Kim's invitation. However, President Donald Trump's dual policy of exerting pressure while engaging in dialogues to denuclearize North Korea has been questioned by not only analysts but China and Russia as well. All eyes are now on Washington's accelerating effort to resume talks with Pyongyang after Trump in August cancelled a Pompeo trip to North Korea if these efforts will bear any fruit. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And news from the Maldives now, where the opposition has won the island nation's presidential election. Ibrahim Mohammed Solih secured 58.3% of the popular vote. Analysts blame public anger over allegations of a graft and a wide-ranging crackdown on dissent as reasons for Abdullah Yamin's defeat. Yamin had drawn the Maldives closer to China, which has stepped up its presence in the Indian Ocean in recent years.
Hundreds of people on the streets of Mali cheering and waving flags of the winning Maldivian Democratic Party. The small archipelago in the Indian Ocean had another shot at democracy. People voting for change, bringing to power the opposition candidate Ibrahim Mohammed Solih. People came out in huge numbers, with the turnout being 89.2%, dealing a decisive blow to President Abdullah Yamin, who later conceded defeat.
Maldivian people have decided what they want. I have accepted the results. I met with Ibrahim Mohammed Solih, who the Maldivian electorate chosen to be their next president. I work to uphold the law.
While country's election commission results said Solih's victory margin was 16.7% over incumbent Abdullah Yamin. Solih is a senior politician in the Maldives and was the joint presidential candidate for an opposition alliance. India's Minister of External Affairs said the election marked not only the triumph of democratic forces in the Maldives, but also reflects the firm commitment to the values of democracy and the rule of law. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also called Solih, underscoring his support for better ties between the two countries.
This is a moment of happiness. This is a moment of hope. This is a moment of history. For many of us, this has been a difficult journey. A journey that has led to a prison cell or years in exile. It's been a journey that led to a complete politicization and breakdown of public institutions. But it's been a journey that has ended at the ballot box.
The Maldives has been in turmoil since its first democratically elected leader, Mohammad Nasheed, was forced out of office following a police mutiny in 2012. This was followed by the controversial election of Yamin in 2013, when the Supreme Court annulled the result. Yamin's 5-year rule has been tumultuous by any measure. He jailed or forced into exile nearly all of his political rivals, arrested hundreds for protesting against his rule, suspended parliament for long periods of time, and shuttered independent and critical media. Besides this, the alacrity with which Yamin embraced China caught India off guard. During Yamin's China visit last year, the two nations signed 12 pacts, including a free trade agreement, making the Maldives the second country in South Asia after Pakistan to enter into an FTA with China. The Yamin government pushed the FTA through the nation's parliament, despite with the opposition not attending the parliamentary session. Yamin also fully endorsed China's ambitious Maritime Silk Road initiative, and with the new guard, Beijing is looking for close ties with the new regime as well.
We offer our congratulations to Mr. Solih, who won the election. We respect the choice of the Maldives people and hope the Maldives maintain its stability and development. China is willing to extend the friendship between the two people and deepen mutually beneficial cooperation.
While rise of democracy is a good sign in the Maldives, the new regime faces many challenges, including that of resurrection of democratic institutions. The opposition unity will also be tested in governance. However, Yamin's ouster has produced a favorable outcome for New Delhi, and it should seize the moment to rebuild ties with Mali. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And another top story this week is from Venezuela. The United States and several South American countries have sharpened their stance towards Venezuela's government. Washington has imposed sanctions on the country's First Lady and 3 top officials as the country's neighbors ready a push for an international investigation into its alleged crimes against humanity.
The US has imposed financial sanctions on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's wife and 3 other members of his inner circle on allegations of corruption. The Treasury Department announced new sanctions against First Lady Celia Flores, the former Attorney General and President of the National Assembly. The sanctions target some of the Maduro's closest allies, including his defense minister, vice president and other allies. The sanctions were announced as US President Donald Trump denounced Maduro as responsible for driving hyperinflation, repressive human rights violations and turning millions of Venezuelans into refugees. In a speech at the United Nations in New York, President Trump called the situation in Venezuela a human tragedy. He asked leaders to join the US in calling for the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. However, Trump said he would be willing to meet with Maduro if that would help Venezuela.
I just want to see Venezuela straightened out. I want the people to be safe. We're going to take care of Venezuela. Okay, we're going to take care of Venezuela. What's happening in Venezuela is a disgrace. If he's here, if he wants to meet, it was not on my mind, it was not on my plate. But if I can help people, that's what I'm here for.
Maduro frequently accused the US of seeking to sabotage his administration by fomenting an economic crisis and stoking unrest. He said his government is victim of an economic war waged by political adversaries with the help of Washington and accuses neighboring countries of exaggerating the migrant exodus.
Nothing like this has ever been seen. If you want to attack me, then attack me. But don't go after Celia. Don't go after a family. Don't be such cowards. Today, they released a list of sanctions against Celia, whose only crime is to be my wife. Since they can't go after Maduro, they go after Celia. And they won't be able to go up against Celia either.
Earlier at the United Nations General Assembly, Argentine President Mauricio Macri said he would take a case on Venezuela's crime against humanity to the International Criminal Court at The Hague.
To express one more time our worry over the human rights situation in Venezuela, and given its gravity, Argentina will take before the International Criminal Court the situation related to the crimes against humanity of the Venezuelan dictatorship. I call on Venezuela to recognize the humanitarian crisis so that it can take advantage of the international cooperation that would attend to a great sanitary and food scarcity of displaced persons.
The United Nations Migration Agency said last month the exodus of citizens out of Venezuela is nearing a crisis moment comparable to the situation of refugees in the Mediterranean. The UN Human Rights Office has already sent a report on Venezuela to the ICC. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And that's all in this edition of World Panorama. But before we go, take a look at the visuals of a 400-year-old shipwreck that has been discovered off Portuguese capital Lisbon. Now, it has been described by archaeologists as the discovery of the decade. The ship was found 12 meters below the surface of the sea and is believed to have been sunk between 1575 and 1625. The ship was involved in the spice trade between Portugal and India. Spices, ceramics and shells used as currency all lied around the wreck. So take a look at those amazing visuals as we take your leave. I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for your time.